welcome to the EaarthFeels Podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to EaarthFeels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. So let's jump right in. What do we have in the queue today, Rose?
Well,
you're the organized one.
No, not so much. But I think today we're going to talk about the idea, as outlandish as it might seem, that climate change is happening for us. It seems like the world, we're so divided. We're so divided. What is going to bring us together? Well, I can't think of anything bigger than survival. And so
that's true.
So yeah, let's explore that a little bit, and then we will end with our usual action step to take, one action step to help unfreeze you, and one tip to keep you sane.
Sounds great. Let's jump right in. And I think some of our listeners might be thinking, climate change, bring people together? It's so divisive. How can this possibly be an issue that could bring people together? So what would you say to that? You can jump in.
Well, so somehow it seems that human beings we've bought into this lie of separation, that we are distinctly separate from the external world. And that leads to all kinds of things. It leads to all kinds of toxic behaviors. It leads to us
destroying the earth. And yet somehow we must come together
to address the complexity and the magnitude of the problem. And maybe this is our opportunity. Maybe this challenge is being presented to us as an opportunity and not something to further divide us. I don't know.
And yet it is divisive. Certainly. So I'm up here in Canada. You're in the U.S. So we bring those slightly differing perspectives to this conversation. But I mean, it seems like climate change is very divisive in the U.S., but it also is up here in Canada. We have a federal government that, hooray, from my climate activist perspective, brought in a federal price on carbon back. Yeah, so that's wonderful, isn't it? And as we did our income tax in the last couple of months, there's a line there to claim your climate bonus. I can't remember. That's not exactly the language, but basically, I think 97% of Canadian households are getting back more money than they've actually put out in the taxes wherever they've paid it. That's what the economists are telling us. So that should be like amazing news, because if you lower your carbon footprint, you'll get even more money in your pocket. So basically, it's a tax on pollution, and it's putting more money into people's pockets. And yet, oh my goodness, we have, unfortunately, mostly conservative politicians. I don't know why conservative politicians seem to not understand the importance of conserving our climate and our water and our children's future, but there it is. And they're in my own, I'm in Ontario. We had an election a year ago where one of the things that Mr. Ford, who's now our premier, one part of his platform was to get rid of the price on carbon that Ontario had. Now, Ontario had worked out cap and trade, the previous provincial government cap and trade system with California and a couple of other states. And that's now gone. And he's, in fact, using our taxpayer money to sue the federal government because of the federal carbon tax. So it's all very ridiculous and clearly divisive. There's also a new Conservative government in Alberta that is also threatening nasty things about pricing carbon pollution. So there it is. It is divisive. We have not yet come together on the issue of climate change. And I guess let's talk about why you and I think that might change. Is it possible?
Well, I think the divisiveness, it goes even farther than political divisiveness. I think the divisiveness is what we're seeing right now, for example, in Syria. The whole Syrian war basically started because there were years of drought, and people lost their land, people lost their ability to farm, and when people are put into a situation where they don't have enough and they think that they are going to have even less, it makes them attack one another, right? We're animals fighting for survival. And so that created a civil war, and then a huge refugee crisis, that people are literally dying of starvation. There's a scarcity of water, and yet no countries want to take these people in. So that's the kind of divisiveness that scares me even more so than the political jockeying, which forgive me, this is my prejudice. The political jockeying in the Western world, I think, is really comes down to these people have made tons of money on fossil fuel industry and plastics and whatever else, and they're seeing that is going to go away. If there's a tax on carbon, then their companies who have spewed so much pollution into our air, they're going to be taxed on it, and their profits won't be as great. That's my understanding, right? So there's all kinds of divisiveness. There's the divisiveness of the haves that want to have more, and then there's the divisiveness of the have-nots that have nothing. And as we get farther and farther down the road, coastal communities are going to be gone. Even in the Western world, there's no way that we are not going to be affected. If coastal communities are gone, if farmland is gone, if water becomes scarcer, then everything becomes more dear. And it's going to cost us more. It's going to make those people who are in places in the world where they don't have a lot already, they're the ones who are going to be paying the prices with their lives before we're affected.
Yes. They are already. And I think you made a really good point with the Syrian civil war, but this might be new for people, so let's make sure that we put in our resources some links to articles that explain that link between climate change and the civil war in Syria a little bit deeper for people if they want to get into it.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to know where to begin. Yes, and the same thing with carbon tax.
Absolutely.
People know what carbon tax is. And
yeah.
So
probably not. Not if they've been listening to the media. So I'm just. So I don't know.
So I think it comes down to this. There's an opportunity to act together, and really. We can continue to be I can continue to think it's all about me and that I don't really care about you. But at the end of the day, do I care if humanity survives? Do I care? Because Mother Earth is going to be here. But humanity may not. We're in the middle of the sixth largest extinction. We're seeing lots of organisms, from bees and pollinators to polar bears and giraffes becoming extinct. Do we care? Do we care enough? And I believe at the heart that we all care. Even those people who might not believe that human beings are responsible for what's happening right now, I think they still care. They care that their children and grandchildren have a future. So it seems like this is an opportunity. It's almost like, well, it is an opportunity. It's the, just like we had talked about before, during World War II, there was an opportunity for people to come together and step up. This is the opportunity of our generation to come together.
And I agree. And you can see in smaller ways, I don't know if you remember when there was that devastation in Haiti. I think that was back in 2009, 2010. The global community stepped up. And was it an earthquake, I think? And in a huge way. And that was right after I sort of was on my climate change journey and blogging about climate change. And I'm like, I observed that, and I think people are compassionate. They want to help. When, in smaller disasters and larger disasters, I can think of some Canadian examples. Last year there was a horrific bus accident that killed a number of the Humboldt Broncos, which is a junior hockey team in Saskatchewan, and our whole country responded with compassion and support and this outpouring of real love. And so I think that you are absolutely right, that this is in our nature. And I also think that this is an evolutionary moment, if you will, where we are going to have to grow out of this idea that we only care about people in our tribe, in our city, in our nation, that we really realize, as you were just talking about, that we are all connected, and that when when the boat starts sinking on the other end, it's not like all the rest of us in the boat can ignore them and their shouts for help and can carry on. We're going to sink too. And so for me, it helps me to frame it in that sort of global sense. First of all, we are compassionate. I think that's an innate human characteristic. And this is an evolutionary moment. And we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. Evolution isn't predictable. But this is, like you say, the opportunity of our generation, and so far we've been dropping the ball.
Yeah, I think it requires a shift in our consciousness. It requires a shift in thinking about what really is a good life. And up until now, at least in the States, the American dream has been, to have a bunch of stuff, to have a home, to have 2 cars in the driveway, to have, the biggest TV, and it's all a matter of how you fill your life with things. But so it kind of requires a questioning of what do we truly value? Do we value things, or do we value human life? Do we value the natural world? And it seems to me we've looked outside and just, we've created this kind of consumption monster. And we're really kind of up against it. We all have a car. I mean, I have 2 children. They each have a car. They have since the time they were 16. I mean, life has just become more and more things. We have walk-in closets now. We have, how many pairs of shoes do you own? How many winter coats do you have? How much food is in your pantry? How many appliances do you have? I think it's kind of like stop the madness. Stop the madness. Why do we feel that we are only have value by? Why is our value measured by the amount of things we have? And
well, I think partly that's been the economic push, hasn't it? Because companies want us to buy things, and so it's the advertising. That's what advertising is there for, to make you think that you're not good enough unless you have the latest iPhone or pair of jeans or bag or whatever it is. And so it is definitely changing that mindset. And I also feel that we've talked before about the privileged position that we've had because of just being born into the families that we were born into, and getting the education that we needed. But the fact is, while we've been pretty comfortable, and your kids and my kids have an education and cars, the fact is the vast majority of the world has been suffering, and a lot of that suffering has been brought on by our consumption already before climate change impacts even happened. And so this, for me, it's a way of bringing it home to us in a way that it's been brought home to so many people around the world. And it's about time that we were affected negatively as well, because the fact is we've been making life pretty hard for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And we're up against it. I mean, I think, the opportunity is there to change, but it's going to take systemic change. I was coming back. It's going to require systemic change. I was coming back from a wedding over the weekend and happened to arrive in Boston on Monday morning, and coming into the airport to see how many, I took the red eye back, which I usually don't. It exposed me to the number of people that were traveling for business on Monday morning. How many people are getting into airplanes? And then I left the airport and got in my car to drive home, and I'm going out of the city as people are coming in, and there's 20 miles of traffic, people sitting bumper to bumper to come into the city. And this is normal life. And how much carbon is being emitted into the atmosphere in a way that we don't even question. We don't even, we don't question at all. I mean, we're not investing in our infrastructures to lessen the amount of individual vehicles. There's a lot of things that we can be doing, and I think that climate change is affording us the opportunity to make those changes, because really humans are pretty ingenious when their backs are up against the wall. That's really my belief, and our backs are up against the wall.
A lot of people don't realize how close to how backed up against that wall we are. That's part of the issue where we are. And I would just point out too that it's a really good demonstration of a couple of things, your examples. One, that people hear that and then that overwhelm kind of wells up, like 20 miles of cars and all of those airplane traffic and that sort of thing, and so we have to acknowledge that, yeah, it is a huge problem. We're not here to say that it's not a big problem. It's a really big problem, and we can each do something about it, and that will make a difference. And there's something else I was going to say. Oh yeah, the fact that the freeways and the traffic, that's a human construct. We could have done it differently, and in many places in Europe they do it differently, although not quite as differently as we need to. But their trains are amazing there. There are more public transportation options, and certainly in the U.S. and in Canada to a large degree as well. The decision was made because of lobbying by car and gasoline manufacturers to build freeways rather than develop public transport, rail, and so that's a human construct that can be changed. It's going to be expensive, but it's not as expensive as not changing it.
Right, and I think we need to, so that kind of gets us back to the carbon taxes, that the people who have created, the companies that have profited off the problem, and continue to profit off the problem, they're the ones that are going to need to ante up to change the problem.
Yep. Now, they will, being companies, always pass it on to the consumer.
Sure.
And that's why in Canada, the federal government is incentivizing it the way it is by giving money back to consumers, because we are going to be paying higher prices, and that's an acknowledgement of it. And some people have said, well, what's the point of pricing carbon if you just give the money back to citizens? But that's the whole point. It makes a point that carbon pollution is bad. We do not want carbon pollution. We want less carbon pollution, and it incentivizes the companies to decrease their pollution, and it also incentivizes citizens who are getting the money back to go, well, if I take public transport, 3 times a week instead of driving my car 3 times or every day, if half of the time I take public transport, I can pocket that money that I'm saving in gas and, go out for a meal at my favorite restaurant. The economists agree. I mean, somebody, William Nordhaus, I believe that was the fellow, just won a Nobel Prize for his work on pricing carbon. So we can put a link to that information as well. So it works. It's been about 20 minutes. How long are we talking?
I think we can wrap up. So we want to have an action step, and I'm thinking that can you make one less trip in your vehicle this week? Can you carpool with a friend or a neighbor to the grocery store even, or bicycle or walk? Do you have to drive to the beach? Can you walk to the beach? Can you take your bike to meet a friend for dinner instead of being in your vehicle? Or can you take public transportation? Just one day this week.
And I would also put it out there sort of as a continuation of the tip that we had in our first episode, talking about it. If pricing carbon comes up in a conversation, stick your neck out. Say it's a good idea. You might be jumped on by everybody else, but they're not going to kill you. What's the worst that could happen? They disagree. So that's my tip.
Okay. All right.
And what's our sanity? What's our saving our sanity tip for today? Last week, or last podcast, it was going outside barefoot, which I would highly recommend. Although I confess I don't do it in January here in Northern Ontario. It's minus 30 sometimes, so not always a good idea. But I guess I would say, and this comes from my wellness practitioner part of my world, is just actually to take some time to shut out the noise and the overwhelm. And if you can take a few minutes, even 5 minutes a day, set your timer or get Insight Timer, which is a free meditation app, which has meditations you can listen to, but also a timer you can set with bells at the beginning and the end, and just sit quietly for 5 minutes. Just sit with yourself, feel what's going on inside, and take some deep breaths. So that's my sanity saver tip for this episode.
Thank you. Yeah, there's something about being quiet, being in silence, that helps you really hear what and reinforces your connection with the natural world. So I agree.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, this has been fun.
Okay. And next week we'll be talking about, are we really going to leave this for our kids to clean up? Are we leaving this mess for our kids to clean up? They're already taking the lead, okay. Which is great to see. But
Fridays for the future.
Yeah.
Next podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, your mother, she has been suffering. And the truth is told beneath the sea.